Connect groups, welcome to week 4 of our session this winter, looking at our spiritual disciplines, our habits, our rhythms, which we are empowered by God's grace, and not just empowered but motivated by God's grace to look more and more like Jesus. So our habits of reading the Bible, our habits of praying and talking to, listening to God. Last week we discussed the spiritual habits of fasting, silence, and solitude. And tonight we're going to look at stewardship. How can we use the gifts of time and money and talents to bring glory to God and say that this is something I want to do better and better? That it's a habit, a relationship building habit to look more like Jesus. So as we think about the clock, as we think about the dollar, all things that have great influence on our lives, how can we consider their role in helping us look more and more godly? How can they help us in our pursuit of to train ourselves in godliness? Well, tonight as we consider our life is a vapor or a mist, as James would say in chapter 4, we understand that we've only been given so much time on this earth. How will we put into practice Paul's words that we would use the time wisely, for the days are evil? And even understanding that one day, as Paul says in Romans 14, all of us will stand to give an account of the time we have lived on this earth. And if we understand that we've been given time, we also understand as followers of Christ, we have been given everything that was first God's. Psalm 24, as well as Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 says, God owns everything on the earth, which means anything that has ever existed, anything that's ever existed in your bank account truly belongs to God and not you. And so how can we train ourselves to take that mindset, and then in an act of worship, how do we steward God's time and God's money in a way that's not just a one-time act of worship, but it is a lifestyle of worship to God? Paul used the church in Macedonia in chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians, and he said that this church gave generously, sacrificially, and joyfully to the work of the kingdom because they understood, first and foremost, they were saved by God's grace, and that sacrifice, that love, that generosity from God allowed them to open up their hands and realize that this life is most importantly lived in response to God, which means their money is not theirs. They will sacrificially give and worship to God. So tonight, as you consider the time you've been given, as you consider the finances that God has given you, how can you take the next step of creating a spiritual habit of looking more and more like Jesus in these ways, to use the things God has graciously given us, to use them well, and to generously, sacrificially, joyfully allow them to be molded, to be shaped by grace from God in order to be grace to others. Have fun discussing tonight and help each other take the next step in your journey in stewardship. Have fun discussing.